Hi, everybody, and welcome to today's session. My name is Kamano Veve, and I will be your facilitator today. Now, I'm going to be handing over to the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Engagement and Transformation Portfolio at Nelson Mandela University, Professor Andre Kiert, to deliver his welcome. Over to you, Prof.
Thanks, Kawa. This has been this Deputy Vice Chancellor stuff. I think we need to talk about that as an introduction. There's so many friends here, joining us as well, as an intellectual community. But thanks so much, friends and friends from our university and from different parts of the globe. It's fantastic to see you here. A very warm Mandela University welcome to all of you to our seminar series, Redirections, Ukuchinchwa Kwendlela, Knowledge Praxis and the African Purpose Curriculum, which we started at the beginning of 2018 when the research chair was taking shape. So I'm glad to say that we are moving ahead with this series, and of course having Cláudio today, for the first time presenting. So many thanks to our team who made the arrangements for today's event possible, and to you all for joining us today. Under the banner of Redirections, we cluster a series of modalities of dialogue that aim to generate debate, critique, and investigate the implication that theory has for our praxis as scholars, students, and citizens, and vice versa. Given the cyclical and self-referential tendencies of our intellectual work, always returning to the same beginning, which in most instances, our intellectual comfort zone, we hope that this seminar series will help us to engage in a deep scholarly manner with social reality and our interpretive and knowledge schemes for acting on it, and to subject our ways of knowing to productive critiques for innovative practices to emerge. That is straight from the concept note that we put together in 2018. So today we are hosting Claudia Pinero, a good friend and visiting professor at our university, and of course, a good friend and partner and collaborator of many others within the networks in which he participates. Some of those I see here joining us today. Welcome, Claudia, and many thanks for making the time and the preparation that have gone into your talk. The theme for his talk makes for an intellectual feast: decoloniality and the global South, revisiting political engagement and transformative disciplinary projects in the social sciences. It is an honor to have Cláudio associate with us, and an honor to have him taking up the keynote input for today. So please enjoy today's engagement. Back to you, Professor Noveve.
Thank you, Prof, for that warm welcome. And now, introducing our speaker, Professor Claudia Pinero, is a professor of Asian and African Studies at Rio de Janeiro Federal University in Brazil. He is the chairman of CEPHIS program, a visiting professor at the chair for critical studies in higher education transformation at Nelson Mandela University. His academic interests include two main axes: knowledge production and circulation, structures of power, slavery, and forms of dependency, both of which consider the impact and durable effects of colonialism in institutionalization of power in Western and non-Western societies. His research and teaching agenda includes theoretical challenges to international social theory by incorporating contributions from peripheral scholars from the Global South into the canon. In recent years, his work has moved from purely theoretical discussions to the construction of intellectual interventions through teaching routines, which includes research on history of social theory teaching and the development of critical tools to address diversity through renewed pedagogical routines. Professor Pinheiro has been a visiting professor and a fellow at the following universities: Wesley College, Harvard Universities in the United States, the University of Vienna, Cologne, Humboldt, and Free University of Berlin and University of Lisbon in Europe. In India, the University of Calcutta, of Goa, of Delhi, at the Center for the Study of Developing Societies, and at the Baekyo University in Kyoto, Japan. It is such a pleasure to have you, Professor, and now over to you.
Thank you so much, Kama. It's my pleasure to be here with you guys and among so many friends. So, I have to also to say a few words of acknowledgement to my dear friend Andrea, who really made it possible not only for me to be here and enjoy the pleasure of talking and sharing some thoughts with you, but also to develop a long-standing relationship with Chris Hett and Nelson Mandela University. It's really wise to foresee, to develop ideas that should need time and space to be cooked, and need not only one brain or one pair of hands, but as many as possible to develop. So I am very thankful to Andrea's vision about this and beneficiary of it. So thanks very much, Andrea. It's a pleasure to join the team and the university. Also thanks to Jenny Dupré, who really been helpful with accommodating my talk and with all the facilitating all the needs for that. I extend my thanks to the Nelson Mandela University and to Chris Hett, of course. But I would like to say also a word of thanks to my university, which has been a very stable and strong voice in times of uncertainty. We've been having a vice chancellor who has been very outspoken about that situation that is ongoing in our country, and how it's threatening not only for the society at large, considering the pandemics and all, but especially science and education in particular. Some of the authors who probably were influential for us in both sides, Africans in Latin America and otherwise, are now the target of political backlash in many countries, including Brazil. So it's really important to feel that the university is fighting the good fight and supporting the students and the professors and the staff that is helping this to become a possibility, this sort of talk. Also, thanks to the CEFIS, which is this network institution that I am glad to be chairing for some time, has a long-standing history of promoting South-South dialogues, but to many other networks which I've been inhabiting, including the GDC, which I share with my dear friend Andrea, but also to my students, with whom I've been sharing most of, some of the thoughts that I intend to share with you today here, and have been benefiting from the feedback and mutual discussions on topics that I think are very central for what we intend to develop in education. So with that said, I will do one first, say, methodological disclaimer, and also another one on the contents of what I will be talking today. When I engage with this discussion on decoloniality in the South, which has been dominated by, say, some sort of sociology of knowledge for some decades, which I enjoy and engage with, I am also looking at it through the lenses of an anthropological analysis of how discourses and performances concerning decolonization take place and take form. So it's not only, say, taking the discussion around the decolonization through the discursive, stage, but also taking discourses and other sorts of performances, including talks, as something that we should pay attention when we consider analyzing what is ongoing concerning this debate. For that, not here probably, or in very few occasions I will make resource to this, I am borrowing some methodological inputs from anthropology, which are making some of my some of situations and some of the people anonymous, because my intention is not denouncing the denouncers. So because I will give time to explain what I mean by that later, but to help thinking through with you about some of the political and disciplinary engagements involved when we talk about the call, what the decolonization turn or the decolonization is engaging is being introducing. So this is probably one methodological disclaimer I would like to do, and also that I am for that borrowing say insights from other fields, including people that are studying migration and how ethnicity is being recasted in migration settings, and also in situations concerning studying on settlements where class and other sorts of privilege are also part of a politic of, I'm looking for the word which I missed really right now, deflected as a form of discourse. So I'm borrowing some inspiration from people studying on television and media studies, where deflecting privileges is something very central to the recomposition of trajectories of the individuals and institutions. So now talking about a bit of the contents, I am embracing the decolonial turn. I'm also a product and have been benefiting and engaging with these readings and discussions concerning the decolonial turn. But I will try to see a little bit beyond, as some of the people with whom I've been reading and listening to are now trying to point to. So there are incredible achievements produced by the decolonial engagement, or so-called the decolonial turn, but also some traps that are perhaps not so visible in the surface, which I think are important to address in a way that we can reorganize or reinterpret some of the behaviors or some of the developments that we've been seeing, in order to probably readjust this process a little here and there. Yeah, and finally, I would like to share with you some thoughts of what myself and some colleagues have been calling a call for attitudes, Southern attitudes in social science, as a sort of re-engagement with ethics, disciplinary ethics. So I will start with a question. This decolonial turn, what is it about? And where is this tsunami coming from? Because if you turn on the internet or probably your TV nowadays, you will listen to this vocabulary very frequently. And some of my colleagues ask sometimes, what is the origin of it? How it became so big? From where? I mean, some people were completely unaware of the development of this debate, and out of the blue, it became such a big hit, such a big issue. And for looking at it, I would like to invite you looking 10 years back, precisely 10 years back, almost 10 years back, to one episode that took place on October 2011 in Brazil, which was the visit of my dear friend and colleague, Raul Cornell, to Brazil, and a small tour she gave with talks and her participation at the Brazilian Association of Social Science. She gave the inaugural speech, the opening lecture of that one annual meeting of this association. So the talk was called "The Coming Revolution in Social Theory." And as she with a very clever or sophisticated sense of humor puts it, it was a very dramatic, theatrical way of addressing this this idea. But also she really took it seriously, or that we should consider at that moment a revolution to come in social sciences. It was something much needed at that moment. So I concentrate on the talk, a bit on the context behind, and what were we doing until that time, until 2011 in social sciences, that this call was made so interestingly central. So Rin divides her talk in three, say, steps or moments. She addresses the crisis of the system of knowledge, which she says was social science at that moment, social science in the early 2010 decade. The revolutionary force, which may solve the crisis, and the nature of the intellectual revolution, what is involved, and some of the practicalities of change. And Rowena centers her talk on starts actually her talk with defining what theory meant at that moment and in her talk. Just to contextualize a little bit, you guys, on the moment when she arrives, what was ongoing, and how did Brazil look like at that moment, or Latin America, or some other parts of the South. We remember that we were coming from the 2007 and 8 world economic crisis, in which, say, the old established developed countries were severely hit by the crisis, while emerging economies were somehow protected, or they actually emerged from this crisis, producing new possibilities of readdressing global geopolitics and economics. In fact, and 1 year later than the crisis, in 2009, the then president of the World Bank, Robert Zoellick, gave a talk saying that he was vaticinating the end of the third world, even before the concept could enjoy its first jubilee. So the third world was ending, so to say. Emerging economies from the South were blossoming, including, say, for example, Brazil, South Africa, China, India, and Russia, which configured something that was very promising at that moment, the BRICS. Parts of Latin America were enjoying having the elections of a new wave of progressive governments, with even many names from indigenous populations being elected to major positions in politics, not only as presidents, but senators and similar. The same for other parts of the South, in Asia and Africa. It is said that in the African continent at that moment, that was the continent in the world with the largest participation of women in politics, much bigger than Europe or any other part of, say, the called West. And there was a general engagement with the multilateralism, which was actually inspiring our comprehension that the next decade, the one which finished recently last year, was probably more promising in terms of reestablishing a more balanced division of power, which would also be extended to other dimensions of social life, including knowledge production. So this is just to give you guys a brief of the context of what was ongoing when Robin arrived to that talk. And what were we doing at that time in humanities and social science in previous years at large and in the South? Most of what we understand now as decolonial was addressed through other, lenses, or had other colors, or smelled a little bit different at that moment. The conditions of knowledge production was a stable sort of platform from where to study and engaging with topics that produce, with the mechanisms that produced inequality at large in the field of knowledge production, not only for, say, humanities, but science in general. So people were very much concerned of the conditions of not reproducing academic dependency, which was a very important topic for many years, but also to other issues concerning knowledge production, like autonomous thinking. How do we avoid engaging with some sort of colonial mindset when we think about knowledge production? And at that moment, and Rowan's talk re-engaged with this call, theory was considered our battleground, with the understanding that normally we have a large labor division of intellectual work, in which the peripheries, or the South, if you like, and there's some sort of instability of this vocabulary until that time, were producing raw material, like researches with the social data, to be later interpreted by theoreticians in the North. So we are providing what is necessary to develop theory, but the theories that we had developed at our grounds, the vernacular theories we had at our side, were probably not so circulating so well as, say, mainstream theories. So that was part of the denounce and the challenge of the time that most of us engaged with. So we were understanding that theory is the representation of power and inequality in knowledge production. So the call was for how do we produce theory, or how does the theory we produce resonates at the mainstream of the discipline. Of course, it also involved the discussion of how the relevance of social sciences to explain societies at large, which was always a mandate, a self-attributed mandate of the discipline. So how do we work with this lack of balance between what we see and how we think of what we see? And who were these we that we had at that moment, engaging with this critique that Rowan was addressing? But actually there were a lot of people before or together with her pointing out to this aspect. You could say there is an unstable semantics addressing geographies and identities of difference and diversity, where the periphery was a resourceful category or an idea as for addressing who we are from outside the mainstream of the discipline, which would probably build connections between thinkers, scientists, and intellectuals, in places like Latin America, Asia, and Africa. We are not coming, the idea of periphery is not coming from out of the blue. It also it's very deeply anchored in connections that were there before, like the circulation of dependency theory between Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Same for the world systems theory, and the discussions that took place in Tanzania in the 80s, and how it really later expanded to other peripheries, so to say. But the South also became a very interesting platform from where to reconstruct a disciplinary project. And many people spoke about that dimension, not only from, say, economically deprived places, which would be the third world before, but remember, we were trying to, bury this idea at that moment. But also the South as a place from where you cannot think autonomously. In other terms, you had to engage with the dominant epistemic realm to introduce your point, your ideas, your name, or even our ancestors in terms of ideas. So we had to engage with this dominant, say, epistemic realm if we wanted to place ourselves within. So the call was very urgent for transformation on how we understand social science and its relevance, but also for a transformation on how we do social sciences at large. But what else people were doing or thinking and writing before that moment? Because still the decolonial turn was there, but was not such a tsunami as we probably see it today. And all the discussion is not coming from out of the blue. It is coming from, we're standing in the shoulders of giants. As I mentioned, the whole debate on the conditions of economic and social dependence in Latin America in the 60s and 70s were really influential for not only for economists, but for policymakers and governmental authorities, or in many places of the South at that moment. From say Malawi or even Tanzania, South Africa, India, Indonesia, and Southeast Asia was extensively read and debated and discussed, and also gave a breadth to the new development new developments around dependency. So dependency was not only restricted to say economic factor or political factors, but also included the way we produce knowledge. That's an interesting development of that circulation of say Southern knowledge through other Southern academias. But also, as I mentioned, the world systems theory, the Black and African studies, the post-colonial debate, and the subaltern studies, and the questions of representation and utterance were very central to this debate. So at that moment when Connor was calling for this revolution to come, there was already an accumulated work for generations of scholars that had been debating around that issue. And they were all also debating on the durable effects of colonialism. Latin America was hit by, in the 60s and 70s, by a huge wave of dictatorships that conditioned the way people could think. For those of you who are not familiar, dependence theory, most of the people were expats. They had to leave the country, their countries to Chile until 73, from where there was a real huge diaspora of scholars that were part of the debate at that moment. Even to Africa, some people who participated at that moment and this debate fled too. So colonialism was like a reference, but probably not the main reference for the debate on the durable effects of inequality in knowledge production or in politics as well. And what is interesting is that the circulation of knowledge between southern, sites, academic sites, depended very much on they have been republished or published for the first time at mainstream settlements. Like even for dependence theory, even if you consider that there were people reading it in Malawi, it depended on it had been published before in the US or in Europe, so that it got accessible to other people, not only in terms of the distribution of publications. Remember, there was no PDF or such or EPUB or these things before. So you needed the circulation of the physical, the physicality of knowledge. So you needed the book or manuscripts to circulate. But also the circulation of people. So the circulation of ideas and the circulation of people were somehow connected to that regard. But apart from that, there were also other discussions that are key for Africans in general, say the critical pedagogies or pedagogies of the oppressed. You just think of how it was influential to Guinea, to Amilcar Cabral's and further project of education. Also, you know, how it is portrayed as very influential for, you know, debates in South Africa. Recently saw this incredible movie on Kalushi, on Salomon Malangu, and how they were able to portray the presence of Paulo Freire's publication in this debate and the political debate in many places, in not only in Africa or not only in South Africa, but saying also in Philippines and elsewhere. The theater of the oppressed, the theology of liberation, and sometimes these debates were not even connected at the origin, but they were, say, traveling together as part of a package of debating around discourses of liberation. Same as having Che Guevara's manual of the guerrilla translated into Tamil, for example, was part of the momentum of this debate. And before the colonial turn took place in Latin America, you might like remembering, because also I suppose that we are most familiar with the name of gentlemen that were part of that debate, but probably less familiar with the name of women that were key and probably were responsible for the first wave of this circulation that hit Latin America, coming, say, from South Asia. So the subaltern studies debate arrived to Latin America, not through the hands of, say, what would later be named as the Latin American Subaltern Studies Group, with people that you know, Walter Mignolo, Enrique Dulcel, Ramon Grossfogel, edited by Eliana Rodriguez, but it came before, in 1997, by the hands of Silvia Cusicanqui and Rosana Barragan. Silvia Cusicanqui herself, a senator in Bolivia, apart from being one of the major scholars of Aymara society. So the translation of this book came through actually this institution which I chair, CEFIS, sponsored not only the initiative, but also the circulation of South Asian scholars to Latin America at that moment, and the translation into Africa, into French-speaking Africa, which came by the initiative of Mamadou Diouf, who would later move to the US, to Michigan, before joining Columbia, which was translated by Catala in 1999. And it also helped bringing the circulation of Southern authors to southern academias without having to pay the taxes of passing through the mainstream academia. How about the decolonial turn? This part of the group who created this momentum, which we're now enjoying, are Latin American scholars, expat scholars in the US, as some of the names I mentioned, but not only. Some are in Mexico, some are in Argentina, and some were actually already themselves part of this first wave of diaspora provoked by dictatorships in 1970s, 60s, and 70s in the continent. But before coming to arriving to the discussion of the colonial turn, they tried a lot of interesting attempts to catch up with so many turns that social theory was producing at that moment. So they developed this interesting journal called Ni Planta, which I encourage you to look at if you can. I suppose it's fully online, and it had a very ephemeral duration of a few years, but it's Ni Planta is this, imaginary continent, and the subtitle of this journal is Views from the South. Actually, it's Views from the South. So it's 2000 and on. Then they produced this subaltern studies reader before arriving to an old concept of a Peruvian political scientist, Aníbal Quijano, who wrote in 1991, and he kept elaborating on this concept of coloniality of power, which was very central to developing a call for decolonizing power. So in few words, what Quijano was saying is that power has many facets, and coloniality is one of this. And he was, explaining how and why it came into be, and he actually was placing Latin America as an inaugural moment for that, given, in his opinion, that it was the first place to be colonized by the Iberian European powers, which really transformed the ground as for many technologies of control of territories, peoples, and thoughts. So this is where from the whole idea of decoloniality is originally coming from. But I suppose it's a bit far from that one origin, or the developments are very fast, so to say, because we now see it evolving to a different semantics, if I can say it in that way, where we probably conjugate a verb, an adjective, and a noun, which is denouncing obliteration of diversity. So this operation, which I am trying to share thoughts with you on how to, understand or summarize this, produced a very particular understanding of what is diversity and how it is being obliterated through time. We all, including myself, have been not only researching and writing, but teaching about that, and showing how there is a system of producing obliteration. And this, what I mean by the system, and what these people mean by the system, is not only a system of thought, but also how publications, how mainstream scholars, editors, founding bodies are repeatedly erasing, silencing, actually obliterating the importance of thoughts and thinkers from outside the mainstream, and how they were so relevant as for how we understand what we think about today. What is, in my opinion, also interesting to see is how the decolonization, say, rather than the colonial term, has been phagocytizing a lot of other debates. So most of those I mentioned around academic dependency, inequalities in knowledge production, capacity to produce autonomous thinking, vernacular theories, circulation of ideas, and this is engaging with producing an unilaterality of power, being object of denounces, but not so much clearly the object of alternative projects. What has been corrected? What can we see as some of the characteristics of the recent engagements with the decolonization move? So to make it a bit different from the decolonial turn, the origins of it recently. What has changed? Well, probably the prey and the saints to whom we pray. We are now committed with finding the most needed new forgotten voices, obliterated voices, and the speeches and the contents of what they were saying in order to enlarge our canon. So to regain relevance for social science, we regain relevance for social science by showing that some people were intentionally sometimes obliterated from the mainstream history of the discipline. And this is not a historical issue. It has consequences in nowadays on how we understand social sciences politically as not only as a field, but also as, say, a move. So we've been compromised with enlarging the canon, with promoting more voices, without changing much, probably, the church or the idea that we need one. So by one side, we say, okay, there are other people that deserve being, promoted to the altar or to say to the Mount Olympus, if you like. But we're not changing the idea that we need a Mount Olympus to begin with. So we probably are now praying to new saints and recognizing the importance of this, and which is, I'm not speaking against, I'm speaking in favor, on favor, but we are still trapped by the necessity of having a church. So while some Southern thinkers are thinkers as promoted as theoreticians to help decolonize in the canon, then there are other probably issues coming out of this sort of choice that we've been making, which is in producing a specific understanding of some people as by their theoretical contributions, but disengaging from their political disciplinary projects. So we separate, we isolate specific ideas, specific concepts that these people were working or investing on, but we forget that apart from the concepts, these people were doing other things, and probably things other than social sciences that are sociologically oriented. So if we promote some, we've been rightfully so engaged with promoting important names, I would just remember one, which is definitely the most important name for social sciences in the 20th century, and which is William Du Bois. We remember the importance of what he was saying about the color line. We forget that his compromise with promoting, say, for example, magazines for young children in the US to speak against racism. So there is this process of engaging with the words and transforming a person into a theoretician, but disengaging with the history behind it. So then I now make one point that I think is one of the consequences or basic operations of what decolonization has been producing, which is the commodification of diversity. So if we are rightfully so producing new names to the canon, we are disengaging with the idea that we need to produce a new disciplinary project instead of only including people them into of ideas, and forget disciplinary or pre-moments were larger than simply a set of ideas that we translate as theory. Because when you translate it as theory, you are engaging with a very long-established sort of commitment, disciplinary commitment, and it also saves us from thinking through or very dedicatedly to what we think sociology or social sciences can be in general. So I can give you maybe two brief examples. One I can mention fully, and the other one I will make resource to this method of anthropology of making, that I said, not in the idea of some food for thought that we could work through and discuss. So one example is the debate on African studies in Brazil. Might be that you're not all familiar, but it became mandatory to teach African history at school levels in Brazil since 2003. And because of that, we also had this incredible blossoming of African studies around the country with new positions for African studies and new contents developed for African studies, a new curricula and all. But by and large, African studies are taught at history departments, where what you see is a very curious division between what is mainstream and what is not mainstream history. So, for example, if you are a freshman or a fresh person in and a undergraduate student in history, you would learn immediately that there is something called antique history, medieval history, contemporary history, modern history, for one side, and theory of history. And also you can learn African history, Latin American history, and Brazilian history, which makes us to think there is a division there by which whatever is the central to the discipline is time, and whatever is like collateral or peripheral is geography. So you learn a lot about African thinkers. Most of my students are very familiar with what is the ultimate publications in Africa, with that, especially if it's translated into Portuguese. But they read it as long as it is in Africa, not as it is in probably as mainstream theory and the discipline. So African authors are confined to African history for one side. And what is understood as a very narrow, probably sometimes it's enlarging, and it's really a political move that also scholars, Black movement and editors are pushing forward, which is translating directly from African, connecting to African publishers and translating and authors and translating it directly to Brazilian Portuguese. But we see African theory confined to African history and not to theory. So we see a process by which you keep compartmentalizing what is the difference within the difference. You're still not able to transform it into mainstream theory. That's one probably of the consequences. The other consequence could be that the more we know about African social theory, the less we know about African history. All that people are now wanting to know is what is considered theory, and forget that behind that there is history. So if we have a majority of men being published, African scholars, men, and most people are denouncing the obliteration of women thinkers, we still engage with the unbalanced on publishing and translating in terms of gender, and also in terms of the importance of women to the African continent, for example. So it is very astonishing to see that people get very impacted, surprised when you mention that, well, you know, according to some indicators, Africa has been in the last decade the continent with more representation of women in politics in the world. You see, this is something we should pay attention to, not only, you know, so how can we combine these two dimensions? This is probably one example of this. So what are ways out of it? Because if we keep like confining to those canonical discussions, like with this compromise of enlarging the church, but still praying, you know, to the same system of a disciplinary project, if you wish, we lose what these people were actually doing, apart from saying what we now consider to be theory. Who can be elected? Who qualifies as for a theoretician? This is another topic which we could debate. But probably one good challenge or a way out of seeing beyond, a little bit beyond this, is, I know my time is running out, sorry. My colleagues Farid Alatas and Vinita Simha's Beyond the Canon, Beyond the Sociological Canon. Because not only presenting names that are relevant for and were obliterated from the mainstream social science, but also they undercover, they show the different disciplinary projects that these people were engaging with. So it's not only promoting what is this understanding of diversity, probably still a bit narrow understanding of diversity, and also re-engaging with the disciplinary projects that were very key to the development of ideas that we are now isolating as theory or as theoretical concepts. I would end up with a very short point of our call, or of what some of us are considering a southern attitude as a way of re-engaging with this movement without, you know, throwing out the whole process or the effort, accumulated effort that many of us have been engaging with. First, it is engaging with promoting social justice and as through what we do as social scientists. So it is not only a commitment to understanding diversity as the promotion of what is understood as diversity as our ultimate goal, but also understanding that the intersection between those dimensions play a definitive role in different spheres, and that the fact that we are from the South does not give us, say, any ontological privilege or, say, commitment to correctedness in terms of ethical behavior in what, say, it does not provide us a non-ethnocentric ontological stance towards the other. The fact that I'm from the South doesn't make me aware of these issues or compromised with the changing the ground, which is actually, as I been noticing, the opposite sometimes. It doesn't give you the ontological dedication to an ethical behavior as well. So also they all play and not equal contribution an intersectional theory around that point. I see that I'm going beyond the time, so I will probably stop here and leave room for if there are questions. Sorry, Kama. Sorry, Aurelio.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Prof. But I'd just also like to add my own comments and I think a question or two. You did mention at the beginning of and throughout your presentation that we've had many positive developments, of course, which cannot be ignored, like the representation of women in politics, in institutional leadership, and. However, how do we avoid not going into the same trap like we did with the discourse of diversity? Because we've seen it, people have written about it, that sometimes diversity is a way of doing advantage. So Sarah Ahmed, for instance, she says in her work that diversity are just non-performatives. So meaning that it's just statements and claims and pronouncements that do not really translate to what they claim. So how do we then try to shift from that and not have to fall into that same trap with the whole decoloniality discourse? Unmute, Prof.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Kama. I totally see what you say. I might not have an answer, but I have been reading people who inspire me on thinking along what you were mentioning. First and foremost, I saw one reflection of Angela Davis along these lines. She says, I have a hard time accepting diversity as a synonym for social justice. Diversity is a corporate strategy, she says. It is a strategy designed to ensure that the institution functions in the same way as it's functioned before, except now that you have some black faces and brown faces. It's a difference that doesn't make a difference. I'm quoting, right?
Yes.
I see the role of color blindness as being that of preventing people understanding the deep depths of racism, because racism is not simply about a color or an individual's skin, it's about the structures of oppression and repression. Okay, so what I see is, what I understand is like the achievements, the very positive and needed achievements that we've been having. I'm not speaking against it. Let me be really clearly sharp on this. Are important, and we should keep, in my opinion, engaged with this. But also we have to understand that this is not helping much so far to transform the structures behind that make it possible for this situation. The other example I would mention is this. Then I will go anonymous with what I say. I recently saw two talks, and I cannot be anonymous with the gender. Men from Arab world and from Africa, giving splendid talks on the decolonial, how important is, engaging with the coloniality and the colonial whatever, and gave very long and all-encompassing narratives of a number of authors. Some really, you can count as much as 50 being quoted. And the African gentleman could not mention a single woman from the continent. I was really impressed by this. And whereas the other colleague could not mention a single Arab scholar, even being himself one. So this gives us a little bit of comprehension that there is still the need for keeping ourselves alert, or say aware that simply engaging with, denouncing the process is important, but not enough probably, and how can we produce really new disciplinary projects that are really transformative from the ground. How can we change the system in terms of the presence of non-white people in positions of power at universities, at funding bodies especially, and how the funding bodies have to readdress the priorities of, you know, how do we develop capacities of people.
Thank you so much, Prof. We have a question on the chat section from Su Ming Ku. She says, thank you for this excellent lecture. To address this over focus on diversifying within the geographical and not addressing the theoretical. What are the theoretical frames that we might try to take back?
Suminko, my invitation is that we probably should think a little bit more on that. Theory is not like only theory is not only what we think, but how we do things. So this is, you know, I'm not the one who is framing this. A lot of people are. That we are not so much sometimes concerned of how we practice this, how we help developing an idea of what theory is, but how do we teach about that as well? This is really a key issue. That power is not represented like in places where there is red carpet only. Its power is a daily practice. So if we do not re-engage with the different power of practices, then we are reproducing it. Like take, for example, Paulo Freire's contribution of the pedagogy of the oppressed. If we keep emphasizing pedagogy of the oppressed as a theoretical concept, we forget the methodological process by which this guy and the group with him developed an idea of how to engage with the different pedagogies. You might remember that, for example, this gentleman was able, and the group of students with him and scholars with him, to literate 300 workers in northern Brazil in the 60s, early 60s, before the military coup took place, in very few days. And it was developed by observing which vocabulary was key for them, for addressing words that were meaningful, socially meaningful for them. So you're not coming and say, okay, now we say C as in chocolate. Well, we don't know what chocolate is anyway. So, I mean, this word doesn't mean anything. So he took time with, if you like, doing some ethnographic research on the ground, understanding the needs of this. So the more we just emphasize, say, for example, oh, this guy was really important for, say, Guinea, the new, you know, and concepts of education. That's good, and let us do this. But probably we should re-engage with the disciplinary project he, you know, envisioned for how education could be transformative. Actually, then it's the difference, I suppose, between transforming him into, say, an avatar of diversity and transforming him into a resourceful political, resourceful figure for politically engaging, not only with education at large, but in other fields.
Ms. Su Ming Ku, would you like to say anything in response to Prof, or maybe add?
Well, I mean, this is very very comprehensive response, really. I think this idea of, you know, starting with pedagogy and re-engaging what we mean by a transformative educational project, and thinking not just of theory, but what it is that we do educationally and how this is linked to theorizing. I see Professor Kiet also has a kind of a more not a less abstract way of putting a similar question about Black studies. So we can wait for Professor Kiet's answer also. but certainly I think, yeah, this is something to do with how we theorize as a way of exemplifying what do we mean by theory. And certainly, like when I start to teach social theory, I'm often the only non-white, non-male, white European professor to teach social theory, and then the students are all white males, and they don't expect to have the professor, you know, I mean, yeah, you know, the lecturer to be a non-white male, and then they think that the theory that I might teach them might be a bit not very theoretical or something, because it doesn't look like theory, because it looks like geography. So you know, but what I do is I start with a little table, and I put their different sources and books and texts that they would read into a little table. Where do they come from? What part of the world? Men or women? What time in history? And I show them how many blank spaces we have in our curriculum, and ask them to speculate about these blank spaces, to theorize something into them, even if it's to theorize the extent of ignorance about, you know, to get names for the ignorance, I suppose. But it's very, very challenging. And as a very committed atheist, I find it difficult to be, you know, praying in that same church, if you like, when we are trying to diversify as well. So no, I really appreciate your answer.
Thank you. Can I respond?
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much, Professor Ko. I share. I totally share. It's a challenge. I like being challenged by my students in the same lines that you mentioned. Oh, but you are a white guy teaching African history. Yeah, that's remarkable. But anyway, do you say the same for the professors of political theory being white as well, or this is really not a problem? So we're probably, as Andrea was mentioning it, why Black studies are not integrated. I think there's another, say, part of this equation, which is the colonial term is, or decoloniality is engaging with race as a category of understanding, but probably not understanding and probably not engaging with ethnicizing the debate as well, like how the norm is still connected to whiteness, like exemplarity of whiteness. And by saying that, I also disconnect it from whiteness as a, like if you're saying about coloniality of power as another facet of power, as another facet of power that we should pay attention to. So I do invitation to my students. For example, I taught a course with a colleague last semester on understandings of time that from Africa. So we will, and elsewhere from the South. So we were reading, you know, how people address time in African theory. So question was like, okay, now that you know how people were addressing, take one example from Brazilian history, or say from French history, and reinterpret it through the African understanding of time. Otherwise, we'll be forever colonizing Africa with our idea of a medieval Africa. So let us recolonize backwards, if you like. If it's the game of, you know, playing colonialism, then take Mbiti's understand of time from Kenya and write back the history of France through those lenses. That would be more challenging than only commodifying Mbiti as law. That's so cool that he understood time that way.
Thank you, Prof. We've got a question from Dr. Ruby Ann. She says, thank you for your insightful lecture. How do we address the systems which are funders' agenda, publication houses, decision makers, etc., that enable and are maintaining coloniality?
Yeah, that's a big challenge, Professor Ruby, because I suppose it's a big challenge. One of the things, like using my institutional hat, actually this is a wishful hat. Futures. We need utopias and futures back on table, I suppose. But one institutional challenge we embraced was like having a discussion coming at one big seminar later October this year at Volkswagen Foundation in Germany on North and South and inequalities on scientific production. Not only addressed through like big, beautiful papers from scholars announcing how unequal science is concerning whatever you like, assessing it through positionality, geography, gender, race. We know that, but how we change it? So for that, we invited representatives of funding bodies to attend. Because then we would promote a setting in which we could debate such a thing. We should be challenging not only, because we are actually ourselves reproducing it, I suppose. It's very difficult not to, you see, it's not a question of right and wrong. I'm saying here, it's not throwing the baby with the water. Is that the saying? It's a bad saying anyway. But the idea that we should get rid of both things, I suppose. So one thing is this. Another thing is how publication houses, our work, for example, as blind peer reviewers, should be also concerned as that. As my colleague Elisa Martin is a long editor of some special academic journals and now vice president of publications of International Sociological Association, like saying this is a central place where we should work collectively on to change how we publish and also the logics behind the decision of what's to be published.
Actually, I wanted to just, I don't know whether it's a question or a comment, but yeah. I think you just touched on it, Professor. Just, I think moments ago, you said we should change the way in which we publish. But I'd like just to add that maybe we should also be mindful of how the westernized ideas of what is publishable or what is worthy of a publication should maybe be a little bit more flexible, but more importantly, it should transform. But I'd like to ask another question. What is our role as people within the academy? Which responsibilities are we taking outside of us writing and teaching? What other responsibilities could we take on in pushing the decolonization further or fast track it a little bit more?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Oh, wait. Sorry, Kama. I totally share. I subscribe completely what you say. And also, I think we could work collectively on a wider understanding of academic citizenship. So now, for the moment, I sit also at the Council of International Cooperation of my university. And we, are demanding to sign a lot of memorandums of understanding agreements with the other universities as well. So what we're trying to change is having a more horizontal relationship when we talk about South-South cooperation with other Southern universities. And also that in no matter agreement we sign, the dimension of incorporating whatever is outside the university, like the larger society, should be addressed. Right? For example, we developing with the Eduardo Mondlane's university in Mozambique, a new agreement coming with the Department of Education. And one of the aims is having courses being taught for teachers at school level in Maputo and Rio, for enlarging our understanding of mutual understanding of African history and Latin American history that could be influential not only for the contents of what you're teaching, but also for methodologically how to do you assess these things. There is this famous Indian sociologist Srinivas who said in 78, intellectuals from the third world cannot escape from a lot of administrative tasks that probably in some mainstream universities scholars could be freed from, concentrating only on doing their work. Professor Kit is one of this. We engage with a lot of what we would call the administrative work. I think we could also call it like enlarge this idea of academic citizenship to understand that these are transformative as well. We are investing on developing intellectual capacity, scientific capacities of people. What are the consequences of now COVID for universities in the South, as for the continuation of careers of people who are normally the more coming from underprivileged situations, they leaving the university, going back to work if there is, because cannot afford be only studying. These are things that we have to pay attention to, and universities that are committed to the project of nation building are very central to move this forward. And yeah, I totally share and endorse what you mentioned.
There seems to be a lot of activity in the chat section. So Dr. Dupree says, that is so interesting. What are your thoughts regarding the cost of open access publishing as it seems to function today? It seems to have the potential to create new inequalities due to certain universities being unable to afford the page fees. I think that question was for Su Ming Ku, but Prof, you can comment on that.
Yeah, it's not my field. I mean, the politics of publication, it's a field per se. So I only share thoughts and also experiences from Southern scholars that most of the time have no other option than finding access to what is the ultimate production of knowledge through, say, unauthorized sources. if you get me, because the students we don't have access. I mean, the universities are cannot afford subscribing like major. So students, this is among the, say, skills that students have to learn if they want to be, updated with the discussions. Otherwise, it's really difficult. So you see a very intricate network of circulation of manuscripts or PDFs and stuff. Sometimes people, from mainstream universities, directing it to friends in places like our places, is not what we would like it to be for sure, but probably in some cases there's no a way for facing it right now. But of course, yeah, I would pass on this because I feel I don't have enough expertise. I would say I would be superficial. I would say.
A few minutes ago, Professor Kiet asked, any idea on why Black studies are not integrated into the decolonization project as sources of praxis, theory, and action?
Yeah, Andre, thoughts that we could share and work on together.
Yeah,
please.
Cláudio, before you go, can I, with your response, can I ask the question from a different angle? So I really like your metaphor of enlarging the church but praying to the same God. Of course, you haven't used those words in such a firm way as I am now translating it. So the question would be, and this is the challenge that we are facing in so many spaces in the South. You see, there's both an argument around how post-colonial studies has been moving away, but also towards the West. So decentering and recentering the Western imagination. And it has been key, to study, countries or peoples or communities like those that you would find on our continent and in other parts of the world. So that's the one key arena, is the reinscription of the Western intellectual imagination, even in a progressive field of study like post-colonialism. That's the one. The second one, of course, is the same critique against African studies, which literally has simply been a kind of geographical distribution of thought outside of any epistemic disruptions. So you have now two of our most productive study fields that should provide for the kind of theories of the South to find expression much more strongly within the decolonization project, but of course in the end find themselves being assimilated to serve that project which they are moving against.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Andre, I totally share this feeling. Let me say one word so not to give a bad impression of what I said also about the African studies in Brazil, is if we have been benefiting, and this is a positive, I would say, outcome of the development of the field there in Brazil, in my country, of privileging theory, say African theory in general. So people are very familiar with the reading Poulan Rutonji, Kilimbembe, or Yves Mudimbi, or Mohamed Man, you name it. Like, and the list tends to be very masculine. Not even the critics that Mudimbi received from, African women, female scholars, are not read because they are not translated. Only Mudimbi himself is. But African studies has been the place for critical debates. That's where from you learn things also other than African, but they are critical to the establishment. So that's extremely positive, if I make myself clear. So even if it's not only African, this is the place where the critical thinking is being cooked, if you like. And students have a major role on this because they are demanding, okay, we're reading this, how would place this, engage with this debate? How does, say, this debate on the coloniality of power is read elsewhere? How does the subaltern, the debate on the subaltern subject is read in Africa? So those are very positive challenges of how we write about history, for example, like the assumptions or the ground in which we sit or organize our. But at the same time, as I was mentioning, it comes at a price that probably we're forgetting about African history a bit. So vernacularization of this debate is not sitting well with what is the Africanization debate. So we probably learn about Poulan Rustonji's theories, but we forget about what is the debate between his project for African philosophy in contrast to Mudimbi's project of African philosophy. So those are dimensions, or to in contrast to Nigerian scholars on the same lines, or to Felveni Sarr, or West African, Northern African philosophers. So it is very interesting that even African philosophy is read as part of the contents of African history now, which helps isolating ideas from some authors. They are translated into the ground, but not deeply connected when they get into our students' work. So if you read, say, dissertations, they are mentioned. Don't get me wrong, they are completely mentioned there. But it's difficult to have it translated or applied as it was conceived by the original authors. Yeah.
You know, I suppose, Kama, if you can allow me, I suppose that the challenge would be that the question of decentering is not about dismissal or displacement. You know, that that's the key principle that one has to keep in mind when it comes to the provincialization of Western-centric knowledges. You know, that's a project of decentering, and because that's why Mudimbi, of course, has made a huge positive note in not in the direction of Foucault, for instance, around the disciplines. That's for sure. And even Mbembe, who has now been established as one of our key thinkers, has been Deleuzian to a large extent. So there is a sense that we will have to put a particular interplay between knowledges on the table that can have an equalizing epistemic project for our students to engage with, because I suspect that that some of the energy around the decolonization project in South Africa has precisely been, you know, the excavation of African intellectual traditions, even prior to writers like Mdimbi or Tonji or Ize, you know. So and that's we have some great projects here, I must say, just to acknowledge our colleagues that are working on those excavations. Yeah.
I think we have time for just one more question because we're running out of time fast. Chloe's asking, she's saying, I joined late and sorry if I talked about this at the beginning of your lecture. I wonder, in your view, how decolonizing sciences could influence the discourses and practices around sustainability worldwide?
That's a very important and big one. How can also we change the practices that make it otherwise? So let me frame it that way. If we, Chloe, hi, hello. You were wearing coat there. So how can we think of this situation where, say, some sort of commodification of thinking that's coming from the South is also helping to boost the careers of those in the North, and this is also sustaining, say, some sort of schema, professional schema, in by which we don't transform much to have a wider engagement with the discipline, but on contrary, we're only reinforcing the same system again and again, by which some people publish addressing questions that are discussed in the South, and present it as like the novelty to mainstream centers, and it also helps boosting their careers instead of producing a new sort of engagement. So I don't know if I make myself clear into that regard. How can we?
Yeah, thank you very much for your lecture, and thanks for taking my question. Yeah, I get your point. I mean, I think my question was, I mean, I'm French and I've been working for Nelson Mandela University for the past 5 years. So but I've been working in many places in South Africa over the past 10 years, especially with indigenous communities. And I'm an ecologist by training, but I work a lot around indigenous knowledge and value systems. Now I shifted during my scientific career because I learned so much around nature, about nature and sustainability, working with people, you know, subsistence farmers, Bushman community, and that kind of, and so, yeah, my question is really related to that. I think there's so much that the rest of the world could learn from these different worldviews. And so I just wonder how that could happen.
I think one of the things that probably connects with what Andrea was saying to what you said is how transplanting ideas from one place to another place also produce, say, some sorts of disconnected, artificially disconnected from the ground sort of thought. As Andrea was saying, some of these things were, you know, going on for a long time, much before those names that we are now very much familiar with addressed this question. What I'm saying is not coming from me myself, but Francis de Moanja also mentioned that before, as like transplanting ideas, as like artificially transplanting ideas from the Cameroonian anthropologist. Transplanting ideas also helped this process of disconnecting them from grounded debate. I don't know if it, but what is unsustainable for me in that regard is how decolonization is important, but not challenging the structure that makes people live through privileges in some specific places. On the contrary, the more we commodify names and thoughts that are coming from the South or the periphery, the more we disengage with, say, the ecosystem where the ideas were produced, and probably do not help much on changing the environment that promotes specific careers of specific people. Like we still are engaged with having a church. There was a article published recently at The Guardian saying we should get rid of all statues. So do we really need to be, you know, compromised with this canonical structure in our thought, disciplinarily speaking, or can we, you know, produce a new sort of engagement? It's not a question of, I mean, it's something that is floating. Different people are mentioning it for some time, not inventing this, not claiming to be, but I think it's in dimension that is probably very relevant for what we do, or how we do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we're at the end of our time. So it just falls to me to close. For those who don't know me, I'm Jenny Dupree. I am a postdoc fellow at the Chair for Critical Studies in Higher Education Transformation. So yeah, just first of all, thank you so much to Cláudio for being so willing to come and speak to us today, and for putting forward all these ideas and provoking this engagement. I think they're very important ideas. I think they're very difficult ideas. Yeah, we're looking forward to continue to build the South-South engagements on these issues. And then a big thank you to my team for all their work on putting the seminar together. Thanks to Nkama for being so willing to facilitate, to Amy, Anelia, and Ariel for the work behind the scenes on putting together the invitations and helping with the Zoom things and all that. I very much appreciate it. And yes, and finally, thank you so much to everyone who attended today. Thank you for taking the time out. I know there is Zoom fatigue is a big deal right now. But so, yeah, really glad you could join us. Thank you so much for all the engagements. Thank you to everyone who came from our various networks, and to everyone who, and of course to everyone from the NMU, the Nelson Mandela University community. Yeah, we hope you will join us for whatever the next one will be. And yes, have a lovely weekend, everyone. Thanks so much again for coming, and stay safe and well. Bye.